Guarding the entrance to Havana's port is the ancient Spanish fortress El Morro. Like many other buildings in the Cuban capital, El Morro stands as a relic from a dramatic past. In history, Havana was a wealthy and strategically important trading city in the Caribbean. Throughout time, the Spanish, the English, and even pirates have struggled to take control of the city. Decades of American domination in Cuba ended in 1959 when Fidel Castro took power. Castro and his government enacted sweeping land reforms and nationalizations. Many Cubans and Americans with property in Cuba found Castro's government unacceptable and fled the island. Upon leaving Cuba, most people had to leave their possessions behind, including thousands of shiny, new American cars. In the 1940s and 50s, Cuba imported large numbers of American cars. But in 1961, all trade between the two countries came to an end. Cuba's conversion to Marxist-Leninist politics and the failed Bay of Pigs invasion led the USA to implement the embargo against Cuba. When the embargo took effect, Cuba began to import cars from Russia and Eastern Europe. However, the embargo damaged the Cuban economy, and Cuba could not afford to import enough cars to meet demand. So Cubans made do by keeping the old American cars running, to this day. In fact, Cuba now has the world's highest concentration of antique American cars. Now Havana is like a museum on wheels. On a walk through the town's old streets, one gets a flashback at some of the most defining years in automotive history. After World War II, demand for new cars exploded in the USA. However, developing new models took time. So many pre-war models came on the market with only a few modifications. While the cars from the 40s were known for their big fenders and smooth lines, many changes took place at the beginning of the new decade. The cars from Detroit became bigger and more streamlined. Oldsmobile introduced the rocket motor. It was a motor that began a race in the industry to constantly develop more and more powerful V8 motors. Nowhere else in the world, other than in communist Cuba, can a person experience such a complete exhibition of American car design from the 40s and 50s. These cars were not produced simply to provide basic transportation. The cars were marketed to appeal to people's feelings. And in the 1940s and 50s, the cars were a symbol of American culture, associating freedom and independence.
Soy muy tuyo y tú mi amor lo has comprendido al ver así rendido a tus caprichos mi orgullo al abismo no temo ir en desenfreno si no me apartas de tu seno, novia de todo mi egoísmo.
As far as car design goes, the 1950s were a very experimental period. Speed and styling were the magic words. America's change to a consumption-oriented society in the 1950s had a profound impact on the car market. By mass-producing cars, the manufacturer could lower the price and sell huge quantities. By making a little money on each car sold, the car companies still made a profit. As the car companies increased their production, more and more people could afford cars. The 1950s were a period of growth and good times, but also of tough competition within the automotive industry. In 1955, Chevrolet introduced the Bel Air with a V8 motor that produced 162 horsepower. The car was nothing less than a sensation. The characteristic side air intakes on the Buicks were inspired by a jet plane, and the Ford Thunderbird was sold as the car for individualists. Every year brought more powerful engines. 8-cylinder V motors dominated the market. By 1957, 83% of all American cars had a V8 motor. The car designs became futuristic. Designers were clearly inspired by the aviation industry. In 1948, Cadillac introduced a new detail on the back part of the car, the fin. The inspiration came from Lockheed's P-38 warplane. Some people claim that the fin served to stabilize the car at high speed. Only a few people believed the story, and even fewer cared. The important thing was that the fins appealed to the buyer's fantasy of being brought into the exciting space age. Double front lights were another item that became popular in the 50s. In 1957, the double front lights were legal in some states but were illegal in others. As a result, some 1957 models had either double or single lights, depending on where they were sold. By the end of the decade, all American cars had the double lights. In 1954, GM introduced the wraparound windshield on their luxury models. The windshield had a glamorous appearance and gave the driver better visibility. The windows quickly became popular and for the rest of the decade were standard on most cars. The car's interiors also saw some big changes. Glitter and chrome, combined with new materials like plastic, appeared in new car models. The cars also got many new conveniences such as radios, interior lights, cigarette lighters, bucket seats, air conditioning, and automatic transmissions. In the grill area of this Buick is a clearly defined female breast. Sex was a powerful weapon in the war for customers. Cadillacs even came to be known for their Dagmars, named after a well-known TV star who wore a bra that was typical at the time.
Of course, success comes and goes. The 1950s were no exception. With all the growth in the car industry, there was also heavy competition. The result was that some very famous car companies disappeared forever. Production of the DeSoto and Packard ended. And even though Studebaker's chief designer was Raymond Loewy, the man who designed the famous Coke bottle, the company was fighting a hopeless battle. Ford managed to stay in business, but the introduction of the Ford Edsel in 1958 was one of the biggest fiascos in automotive history.